Gordon Chang has been saying for 20 years now that China is on the verge of collapse. He published this book, I think it was in 2012, The Coming Collapse of China. China obviously has not collapsed. Now we hear the coming collapse of Iran. Every few years we hear this. The Iranian regime, the mullahs, are on the verge of collapse. In this case, what's actually quite striking is how openly the US and Israel were backing these very violent riots in Iran. You know, if you listen to the Western media, they call them peaceful protests. Trump called them peaceful protests. They were extremely violent. And you've even seen some mainstream media outlets admit that these rioters were burning down many government buildings in Iran. They were even burning down mosques, which is crazy. I mean, like, this is a religious country, and burning down religious institutions is going to alienate so many people. It shows how extreme a lot of these rioters are. And we've seen that Trump was openly supporting these very violent protests. Trump called on them to take over Iranian institutions, which is a call for regime change. And back last year, when Trump bombed Iran, he also openly called for regime change in Iran. He's repeated the slogan, "Make Iran Great Again, MIGA." And as for Israel's role, a major Israeli media outlet, Israel's Channel 14, admitted that foreign countries, unnamed foreign countries, but it's heavily implied the US and Israel, are arming the so-called protesters. That's what the way that the Israeli media reported this. They're obviously not protesters if they're getting weapons from foreign countries to wage war against their own country. That's an armed insurgent. But the Israeli media reported that these Iranians are getting weapons to try to overthrow the government. And this Israeli media outlet reported that this is why hundreds of security forces, including police and other security officers of the Iranian government, have been killed by these armed insurgents. This is, again, according to the Israeli media, boasting about this. And then Mike Pompeo, who is the former CIA director and former Secretary of State in Trump's first term, Pompeo went out on Twitter and he praised all of the Iranian protesters and the Mossad agents walking beside them, is what he said. So it's just like, they're saying the quiet part loud. They're not even hiding that this is a blatant regime change attempt using extreme violence, burning down buildings, burning down mosques, killing Iranian officials like they did in Libya in 2011 and Syria. Now, Libya and Syria, of course, had different paths to the same result, which is destruction and chaos and destabilization. In 2011, we saw that the US backed these violent so-called protests, these riots and insurgencies inside Libya, and then it culminated in US-led NATO forces waging a war, bombing Libya and killing Libya's leader Muammar Gaddafi, causing a failed state. Here we are 15 years later, and there's still no central unified government in Libya. There's still an ongoing civil war, chaos, open-air slave markets. I mean, this is what the US and NATO unleashed in Libya. They literally brought chattel slavery back to the African continent. And then, of course, in the case of Syria, it was even bloodier, honestly. You had a civil war that the US started this. I mean, even calling it a civil war is misleading. You had a straight-up proxy war. The US, Israel, Gulf states, Turkey flooded Syria with weapons, waged this insurgency, this war against the Syrian government. After 13 years, they succeeded in overthrowing the Syrian government. And now here we are 15 years later, and Syria has a puppet government that is literally run by the former leader of Al-Qaeda, who is a senior official in ISIS. This is the guy, Mohammed al-Julani, also known as Ahmad al-Shara. He's the leader now of Syria. By the way, the West loves to talk about democracy and Iran and all that nonsense. Syria never had an election for the former leader of Al-Qaeda to be their leader. He just declared himself the so-called leader at gunpoint, and he has no intentions of having elections. Because if you actually believe that any of this has to do anything with democracy, I mean, you have the geopolitical understanding of a child. It's just so frustrating seeing people, when it comes to Iran, say, we have to support human rights and women's rights and democracy. If you actually believe that, I mean, you have drunk the Kool-Aid to such a degree that you are fundamentally incapable of understanding what's happening in the world politically. And after what happened in Libya, and then after what happened in Syria, if you look at what's going on in Iran and you actually believe that propaganda, I don't even know what to say to people anymore. It's just like you have not learned anything from the past 15 years. Not even to mention the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, again, in the name of human rights and democracy. 1 million Iraqis died, and now we have a new Iraqi government that, it's not entirely independent of the US. But, I mean, what was the point of that? Just destabilizing this entire region, killing 1 million people. And now they want to repeat that in Iran, which, by the way, is significantly larger than Iraq, significantly larger than Syria. There are 100 million Iranians. Like, if the US actually does succeed, fortunately, I don't think they will succeed. We've been told again and again that they will, and they haven't. I don't think they will succeed because so many Iranians have seen what has happened in their neighboring countries, and they're going to rally behind the government, and they're not going to allow this to happen. But, of course, this is what the US and Israel would like to do is, in their best case scenario, what they really want is they want to put in power the so-called crown prince, Reza Pahlavi, this puppet who's a complete fail son. He's never had a real job his entire life. His so-called job has been the crying sycophantic son of the dictator, the Western-backed monarch, the Shah, who was put in power. Let's not forget the context here. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence organized a coup to overthrow Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh because he nationalized Iran's oil reserves, which previously were being exploited by US and British oil corporations. And in 1953, the CIA and MI5 organized this coup. They overthrow Iran's democratic government and put in power the monarchy, the Shah, who then proceeds to run, by the way, on the issue of human rights, he then proceeds to run one of the most brutal regimes in the history of the country, in which the Savak, the notorious secret police of Iran under the Shah, just torture and kidnap and kill any dissident. I mean, they make the current Iranian government look like it's, all cuddly based on hugs and rainbows. Like, it's a complete joke, this idea that the West cares about human rights. And then in 1979, which is really where everything starts here, the Iranian people rose up in a revolution and overthrew this Western-backed puppet monarchy. And ever since that revolution in 1979, the US and the West more broadly have tried to overthrow Iran's revolutionary government. The US has imposed illegal sanctions in violation of international law aimed at suffocating the Iranian people by collapsing the economy, like the illegal sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba and Zimbabwe and other countries. And yeah, there are serious economic issues in Iran. There are high rates of inflation. There are shortages of certain goods. And that's largely because of the sanctions. People love to say, there's corruption and there's mismanagement. Corruption and mismanagement exist in every country on earth. Look at the US talking about corruption. I mean, we're now seeing some of the most naked corruption ever. Look at the insider trading that just openly goes on in Congress. Look at Trump just like enriching himself with all these businesses with the UAE and all this stuff, all these crazy deals. Like, corruption and mismanagement exist in every country. But what doesn't exist in every country are suffocating illegal sanctions imposed by the world's hegemon that dominates the global financial system, which is based around the US dollar. The US has been economically suffocating Iran for decades. So you see, Andrew Yang, these politicians in the US say, we must help the people of Iran. The only response to that nonsense should be, okay, if you truly want to help the people of Iran, then take your boot off the neck of the Iranian people and lift these illegal sanctions that have devastated the Iranian economy and hurt millions of Iranians.